Good afternoon. This is Dawn Fenton, and I'm the Director of Policy for the Diesel Technology Forum. I'm here to talk to you today about the Diesel Emissions Reduction Act and the retrofitting of agricultural engines. This presentation was given to the Agricultural Air Quality Task Force meeting, which was held in Raleigh, North Carolina on September 29th. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Diesel Technology Forum, we are a not-for-profit organization that works to increase awareness about clean diesel technologies. We are also a membership organization, and our membership includes companies across the range of energy, engine, vehicle manufacturing companies, as well as emission control device manufacturers. And our education outreach is done in a number of ways through the use of white papers, briefings, webinars, and technology demonstrations, and other outreach events. And there you can see a list of our members, a smattering of them. So in looking at the Diesel Emissions Reduction Act, this is a program that is a broad national funding program. It was created under the Energy Policy Act in 2005, and it was authorized to provide funding for retrofits valued at giving up to $200 million a year for 5 years, although the actual funding for the program has been much lower than that, averaging closer to $60 million a year. It is a national program with funding divided between a national competitive program and a state program in which all 50 states do get some of the funds. And the program provides funding for each of the 5 R's of retrofit. And by that we mean the ones listed here on the slide, which is repowering, which is taking an older diesel engine out of a vehicle and replacing it with a higher tier level engine. Rebuilding, which is rebuilding an engine to a higher tier level. Refueling, using cleaner fuels, such as maybe use of biodiesel. Replacement, which is the retiring of an older piece of equipment and replacing it with something cleaner. And then retrofit, which is the installation of an exhaust control device. One other note about the program is that it is, as I mentioned, it is authorized for 5 years, and it will expire at the end of this current fiscal year, FY 2011. This graph comes from a study from the National Research Council, which looked at air quality projects funded by the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program in the Highway Bill. The point of including it here is to show what has since become an increasingly recognized fact in the transportation and air quality communities, which is that diesel retrofits offer one of the most cost-effective options for reducing emissions of particulate matter and NOx. Of course, over its first few years, DERA has proven to be a successful competitive program, which has sparked significant national interest in the area of diesel retrofit. Millions worth of applications beyond the $464 million which has been awarded to date have been submitted. And they've also leveraged significant other sources of funds for this important investment. In fact, EPA estimates that more than $1 billion worth of qualified unfunded project proposals have been received. Now, in looking at the program, I don't want to get into a lot of detail, but wanted to talk about a few things just to give you a general sense of the program. And this graph here shows you the structure. As you can see, there's a national program and a state program. It's broken down with the national taking 70% of the funds and the state program taking 30% of the funds. The figures in this graph are based on the presumed amount of $60 million that is going to be in the program for FY 2011. And under the national program, you can see there are 3 different components. The one I'm going to talk about today is the National Clean Diesel Funding Assistance Program, which is the largest of the 3, with an estimated $32 million for FY 2011. Then, as you can see, there are also an Emerging Technologies Program and a Smart Way Innovative Finance Program. In looking at the the National Funding Assistance Program, you can see here that eligible entities include governmental agencies or nonprofit organizations. These governmental agencies can be state, local, tribal, or port agencies that have jurisdiction over transportation or air quality. And the nonprofit organizations can be those which work to reduce pollution or provide educational services related to pollution reduction, that operate fleets, or that have as their principal purpose the promotion of air quality or transportation issues. The private sector cannot apply directly for the funding, but they can do so in partnership with other eligible entities. And as you can see, a broad range of vehicles and equipment is eligible to compete for the funding, ranging from trucks and buses and construction equipment and agricultural and mining equipment and so forth. In looking at the use of funds, you can see here that the DERA program cannot be used to fund retrofits that are mandated under federal, state, or local law. However, they can fund early compliance for a mandate that is on the books before the effective date comes into play. Grants cannot be used for emissions testing or for fueling infrastructure. And the other main point is that it can only be used to fund technologies which are either verified or certified by U.S. EPA or by the California Air Resources Board. As you can see here in terms of coverage, the DERA program is quite generous in terms of its percentage of reimbursement. The program provides 100% reimbursement for verified exhaust control devices and for the use of cleaner fuels, and also for idle reduction technology. It provides 75% coverage for engine upgrades and engine repowers, and 25% for the cost of certified replacements of equipment. And here you can see, back to the graph again, we just spoke about the national program, and now looking at the state program, which, as we mentioned in FY 2011, is estimated to be at $18 million. With the state program, the good news is that this is funding that is available to all 50 states, as well as the District of Columbia, and this is money that is dedicated to diesel retrofits. And states, if they do provide a match for the base allocation, they will get an additional bonus amount. Now, this amount varies year by year depending on what the overall appropriation from Congress is. But if states do match, then they will get some additional amount as well. The other primary benefit of the state program is that once the money goes to the states, then it is much less restricted in how the states use it. So unlike the federal program, there's no requirement that the states have to impose for matching dollars. There's no requirement that verified technology be used. And it is really up to the state's discretion to decide how they want to use those funds in terms of if they want to dedicate it to a certain type of retrofit technology or to a certain category of equipment or vehicles. As I mentioned earlier, the DERA program is expiring at the end of this current fiscal year. However, there is an active effort to renew the program for another 5 years. There's an active coalition of industry, environmental, health, and governmental organizations working to get the program reauthorized with some small programmatic changes. And these would include the elimination of a requirement that 50% of the funding be used for public fleets. It would also allow private entities to apply directly for the first time. However, it would be limited to private entities that have a contract with a governmental agency. It would also remove the restriction on the use of the DERA funding for meeting mandates. There's also provisions for a simplified application process and implementing a rebate program. This reauthorization effort is being led by Senators Voinovich and Carper in the current Congress, and the goal is to have the program reauthorized before the end of the 111th Congress, but if not, the effort will continue in the 112th next year. Shifting now to look specifically at the agricultural sector. To date, there have been very few agricultural retrofits that have been funded under the Diesel Emissions Reduction Act, under the DERA program. Of those that have been funded, most have been in California, and they've been for ag pumps or irrigation pumps. There have been, as you can see by the list there, some projects done in other states. For example, in Utah, $750,000 was provided as part of the stimulus program, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, for repowering and replacing agricultural equipment. The reason why there have been less retrofits done in the agricultural sector is largely due to the fact that there's less pressure on this industry to retrofit, since a much larger percentage of diesel emissions come from the on-road sector from buses and trucks and even from the off-road construction sector. However, as these sectors are getting cleaner and the amount of emissions are being reduced, governmental agencies and others are looking to what the remaining sources of emissions are so that they can work on reducing them, and agriculture is one of those. As you can see by this map here, this is a map by the U.S. Department of Agriculture showing the number of tractors that exist in the country. And as you can see, one dot equals 250 tractors. And there is a large number across the country, certainly a density a bit on the West Coast, but then obviously quite high in the Midwest, which has also, in addition to California and New York and some of the metropolitan areas, some of the most troublesome air quality in the country. Many of these tractors are actually quite old. As you'll see coming up, we'll talk about the age of agricultural equipment, but it is not uncommon for many of these machines to be even decades old. In looking at this agricultural equipment, I first want to point out and talk about the significant gains that have been made in emissions reductions from agricultural equipment over the last couple of decades, really since the early 1990s, which is represented in this slide. You'll see here, and this we're talking from machines ranging from 174 to 750 horsepower. In these graphs, on the vertical axis is stands for particulate matter, and the horizontal is measuring NOx. And you can see we've gone from Tier 1 engines, which had regulations limiting the emissions to the levels represented in that block, moving all the way down here to interim Tier 4, which will come into effect in 2011 in just a few months, where there will be a 90% reduction in particulate matter from the previous tier level. So you will have significantly reduced particulate matter emissions in 2011, and this same reduction will come into effect for the smaller horsepowered engines the following year in 2012. And then you can see when we get down to 2014, just a few more years, there will be further reductions in emissions, which will then make it so that new agricultural equipment will have 99.8% fewer emissions than those that were manufactured in 1996. So huge gains there. And of course, all of the agricultural equipment has been using ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel with 15 parts per million of sulfur since 2007. In looking at the population of tractors that are out in the field right now, this graph shows that the numbers of small tractors have really grown in recent years. It's a little bit difficult to see this graph, But on the bottom you have years ranging from 1970 through 2008, and the different colored lines represent different sizes of equipment, with the lowest bottom purple line being kind of the larger four-wheel drive combines, and as you go higher the lines represent smaller equipment, and the top line represents total tractors. And you can see in the early 70s the number of larger tractors growing while the number of smaller tractors declining quite significantly. And then as efficiency grew and farming has changed, there's been a shift to using more smaller tractors, which we see with the leveling off of the purple line on the bottom and the rise in these smaller tractors. The reason why this is important to the issue of retrofit is that it related to the size and visibility of small tractors that are used in specialty markets, and many of these smaller tractors don't have room for particulate matter retrofit kits or special exhaust control devices. You'll see here in this next slide that currently in California, 90% of the tractors used are this smaller variety, less than 100 horsepower. And as you can see on the from those pictures, there's very little room to install a device that without limiting the operator's visibility or providing safety concerns related to potentially hotter temperatures than normal, with normal muffler surface temperatures, which come during the regeneration of the soot that builds up in the particulate filter. This was an issue that is very much like the one experienced in the construction sector in California, as that state has moved to require retrofit devices be installed on all construction equipment. Again, you had a lot of pieces that were smaller with no room for these filter-type devices, and then in many cases they were installed, and it was found to provide a safety hazard in terms of blocking the field of vision of the operator, or providing other concerns as it related to temperature. And so because of that, the California Air Resources Board and Cal OSHA had to develop a policy to address these concerns. And that policy guideline guide exists. There's a link to it here on the slide, and it addresses how to handle these cases. And if it is true that it is impossible to install these devices on the smaller pieces of equipment without impacting safety, then they are exempt from having to install the equipment. This next chart is meant here to talk about another type of retrofit, which is a repower. And as I mentioned earlier, a repower is when you remove an older engine and you replace it with a higher tier level. In this graph, we have an analysis of sample equipment to look at this option, and it also mentions the retrofit equipment as well. But as you can see going across the columns, you've got the age of the equipment, the year that it was manufactured, the type of product, with it being either two-wheel or four-wheel drive, the tier level of the engine, with tier level 0 being unregulated, and then becoming cleaner engines as you go down. And then you've got some specific information about a model year and hours used and an adjustment figure. And you get to this column, which is adjusted retail cash value, which provides what the value of that piece of equipment is to the farmer that owns it. And then when you go further, and then if you want to consider a repower option, there's an estimated repower at retail column, which provides the cost of what a repower would cost that farmer to install on that tractor. And the next column is the interesting one. When you look at that the repower cost versus the residual value of that equipment, you can see in many cases it is a significant percentage of the value of the equipment, and hence it may not indeed be economically viable for an equipment owner to invest that amount of money into their vehicle or their piece of equipment based on what its ultimate value is. You can see the second red bubble there is focusing on some of the estimated retrofit costs, which by retrofit here we mean an exhaust control device, moving over one more column, and some estimated costs for installing that. And then the last column, you've got an estimated the retrofit cost relative to the residual cost of the piece of equipment. And again, you can see here that they're very high. And in some cases, the cost to retrofit is more than the actual cash value of the equipment that is being retrofitted. And this is even higher in many cases because before you can install an exhaust control device, you first have to repower the piece of equipment and then install the actual particulate filter or exhaust control device. And so in this case here, you can see that depending on the age of the equipment, depending on the horsepower, depending on a lot of factors, that doing a retrofit or repower in some cases is just not economically viable for a farmer to undertake. And so when we look at these different retrofit options that exist, we can see that each of them have considerations and have pluses and minuses associated with them. So when we look at the exhaust control device, we can see that, as I mentioned, it's not something that's available or suitable for all equipment. Certainly the older pieces of equipment, the Tier 0s and Tier 1s, are not eligible to have an exhaust control device installed, or at least not without also having a repower. We mentioned about how a number of the equipment is smaller, and so installing exhaust control devices can have visibility and safety factors that need to be considered. There are also some warranty issues. In many cases, the engine manufacturer or the equipment manufacturer will not warranty an exhaust control device that is added on afterwards, and in some cases, they will not honor a warranty for some of the safety features of the vehicle if a exhaust control device is installed. And the other point I should mention is that with an exhaust control device, there are no efficiency gains that are gained, no efficiency benefits, I should say, that are gained. It does make a significant improvement in emissions reductions, and in fact, with some of these devices, you can get anywhere from 20 to 90% reduction in particulate matter. However, it does not provide any fuel economy gains at all. When we look at repowers, there are also limitations here. Repowers are not even available for pre-1991 equipment because that older equipment, the engines were actually structural into the machines, and so it's just not possible to do a repower on some of these older ones. A benefit of the repowers is that they often do provide efficiency gains as well as the emission reduction benefits that come from providing a newer and cleaner and higher tier engine. However, as we saw in the previous slide, they may or may not be cost effective when you consider the residual value of the equipment. In looking at replacements, which I mentioned is another retrofit option under the 5 R's of retrofit, this is obviously the most expensive option because you're actually talking about buying an entirely new piece of equipment, which is always going to be far and away above the cost of a component part. However, the benefit is that you get absolutely the greatest efficiencies and the greatest emission reduction benefits, especially when you're looking at that older equipment, the Tier 0 and Tier 1 equipment, because those, in the case of Tier 0, those were unregulated engines, So buying something new today, as you saw from the earlier slide, how significantly reduced those emissions are, you can get huge benefits. And these benefits are not only in terms of the emissions, but also in terms of safety issues. You would have the new safety features that are always also improved, as well as emission reduction improvements in new equipment, as well as additional operator comfort mechanisms that exist in newer equipment. And then finally, the option of idle reduction. I didn't talk about this earlier, but idle reduction is another form of retrofit that can be done, and it actually is a relatively low-cost option. Usually for $1,000 or $2,000, you can get an idle reduction kit, an engine shutoff kit, which will help to reduce idling and significantly save on costs, for fuel costs as well as reducing emissions. Obviously, it's not changing the equipment in any way, so that when it is running, there is still the same level of emissions that are being generated. However, when the machine is turned off, you obviously are not producing emissions, and so the overall emissions coming from that equipment is reduced, and also the fuel usage is reduced as it's turned off. So another very popular option as it relates to retrofitting agricultural equipment. So in conclusion, I just wanted to leave you with a few main points here, and these being threefold. Number one is we saw new diesel agricultural tractors are exceptionally clean, and this is across the board for all diesel equipment. But in the off-road sector, in 2011, very shortly, the newest tractors and ag equipment coming out, off-road equipment, will have 90% less particulate matter emissions, and a few short years later, they will be 99.8% cleaner than those that were produced back in 1996. Second point is when you're looking for retrofit options for agricultural equipment, the greatest gains come from replacing that older equipment with newer equipment. It is difficult, but not impossible, to retrofit some of that oldest equipment. As I mentioned, well, the oldest, pre-91, it is, but older ones that are in the 1990s, say, it is possible to repower, but as you saw, that it may or may not be economically viable to do so. There are the smaller tractors. The fact that so many of the ones out in the field are smaller pose challenges, both maybe not only in terms of the age as far as repowering, but also in terms of an exhaust control device as it relates to visibility and safety issues. And as we saw, from actually replacing a piece of equipment, you get efficiency as well as safety and emissions reduction benefits. And so it often provides the greatest gains of all the options to be considered. And the third point gets back to the earlier part of the presentation, which is that funding does exist to help retrofit and replace agricultural equipment. We spoke in detail about the Diesel Emissions Reduction Act, a program that is dedicated solely for this purpose and has been used very infrequently, very minimally to date by the agricultural sector. But it is certainly eligible for use by this sector, and hopefully will be reauthorized for another 5 years to go from FY 2012 to 2016 and be an eligible source of funds for this community. In addition, there's also the NRCS Conservation Innovation Grants Program, which we've not gone into detail here, but is a program that exists and funding that was provided through the 2008 Farm Bill, which focused on improving air quality from agricultural activities. And through this grant program, you are eligible to apply for and compete for funds to retrofit and replace agricultural equipment. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention today. Here's my contact information. And if you are looking for more information on this subject or any subject related to clean diesel technology, we invite you to visit our website at www.dieselforum.org. Thank you.